The apartment I recently moved into had a weird wall that smelled like mold. One night I saw a dark spot on it, as if blood was coming out. In horror, I tried to wipe the stain, but it only became brighter and turned into the inscription, "Help me." I immediately called the repairman, but the next morning, when the repairman arrived, the inscription had disappeared. A few days later, I learned that the previous tenant had disappeared, leaving behind strange notes. And that night, I saw the writing on the wall again. It said, "Now it's your turn." I worked as a teacher and was always concerned about my students. One day, a boy, whom I had never seen before, came up to me. He asked to be escorted home, but when we got there, the door was locked and no one answered the calls. A few minutes later, his grandfather came out and, seeing the boy, turned pale. He showed me a photo on his phone and told me that his grandson had disappeared several months ago. Turning around, I saw only emptiness in the place where the boy stood. The next day, I found out that he was found dead the night he brought me to the house. I was often sitting late at the computer, and one night, I heard a knock on the window. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I decided not to pay attention. But the knocking was repeated every night, and at some point, I saw a strange face looking at me through the glass. I screamed. The face disappeared. When I called the police, they said they found nothing strange and advised me to get more rest. But then I noticed that the knocking was coming from inside, from the bedroom window, where I never sat at night. An elderly woman lived opposite us and often looked out of the window. One day she didn't show up for several days, and I went to ask if she was okay, but neighbors said she died a year ago. I returned home, and in the evening I saw her again in the window opposite. She smiled and waved her hand. The next morning I received a note under the door. "Now look at me." And that evening her apartment was empty. But my own reflection was looking at me in the window, with a smile alien to my face. After buying an old house, I noticed that every night there was a knocking noise coming from the attic. Deciding to find out what was going on, I took a lantern and went upstairs. There was a small doll in the attic, and its eyes seemed to be looking straight at me. Then there was a knock from the door to the attic. Someone slammed it. In the darkness, it seemed to me that the doll was getting closer. Having difficulty getting out, I thought that everything had seemed. But when I returned the next day, I found a note. "You opened the door. Now they are free." The lights often went out in the old apartment, and one day I took a mirror to direct the light from the lantern into the bathroom. But turning the mirror, I froze. In the reflection, there was a figure behind me. I turned around. No one. I thought it was a trick of the light, but when I looked in the mirror again, the figure was closer. She was looking straight at me. He broke the mirror in panic and ran out. Later, I realized that there was my own reflection on the floor, and it did not move. A few days later, a neighbor said the previous tenant was rumored to have disappeared after seeing a different side of himself. I went on a hike, and having set up camp, I heard strange voices in the night calling my name. Thinking they were friends, I left the tent, but there was no one around. Then I saw a dark figure at the edge of the forest, and she beckoned me with her hand. My heart sank, and I started running towards the camp. The next morning I found my phone and looked at the recordings of the night. The camera near the tent recorded how I went out and followed the shadow, which led me further into the forest. But in the last recording there was me returning back and going to bed in the tent, although I clearly remembered that I did not return. I was driving along a deserted highway when, in the headlights, I saw a man voting on the side of the road. I usually don't take travel companions, but there was something in his look that didn't let me pass by. He sat silently, looking out the window, but soon said, "You won't make it to the end, right?" I froze, not knowing what to answer, and at that moment I realized that I had never seen him enter the car. He looked at him and was blinded for a second by the bright light of the headlights, which is why he almost crashed into the fence. When the light disappeared, no one was there. Already at home, I saw his photo on the news. This man died in an accident on the same road yesterday.